Hey there, and thank you for joining me on the Parable Podcast today. I'm Danielle Zapchenk. This episode is a great reminder of why this podcast exists. It's to help others share their stories, some of them that we've never even heard before. So today's story deals with the hurt, the loss, but also the sustaining hope of Jesus. Meet Erika Harris, a new friend of mine who shares about how our life stories can teach us the greatest lessons.
Girl, we ran so many laps. What a perfect picture, though, of like our lives as humans. Like sometimes we just run in circles, but God doesn't call us to do that, man. He called us to conquer that mountain.
Here's my conversation with Erika Harris. Welcome to the Parable Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today. Erika, tell me a little bit. You live in Arizona. Tell me about your family, what you do. Do you live in Gilbert? Is that right?
Yes, we live in Gilbert. It is very hot here, just so you know. It's like the sun is on your face is what it's like. But yeah, we live here. We love Gilbert. It's very family oriented. I'm married, going on 16 years this year. And I have 3 beautiful little girls who all have birthdays this summer. So they're going to be 13, 11, and 3. So I got that gap right there. So
are you a creative mom who loves to have all the decorations, a crazy birthday cake, or are you just you know what? Here's the DQ cake and let's go.
You know what? This is the thing. I am super creative, but I am super on a budget. Okay. And that's how we've always rolled. So one year we went all out for the 2 older girls before our little one was born, and they had a Frozen birthday party. They were Anna and Elsa, and it was awesome. And so we just got one of those regular cakes, and then we just decked it out. We bought ice crystal candies and made this whole thing where Elsa's up there, her little thing. And so we go all out, but on a budget.
All right. So Erika, you have your own business. Can you tell me, have you always had this entrepreneurial spirit about you? And how did this business come about?
So no, not really. I guess not really entrepreneurial. Somebody asked me the other day, was this always a dream? I was like, no, not at all. It actually came about. This is part of my story is I'm calling this my Graves into Gardens moment, this whole business. And it's a culmination of a lot of things. But I think where I kind of got that entrepreneurial spirit is really from my parents. My mom, she stayed at home all the way for whenever I was a baby through preschool. And when I went into kindergarten, I think is whenever she started work. But she was an entrepreneur. She just didn't have an opportunity, and she didn't really have the business degree. Things weren't going for her. In other words, I grew up poor. So I remember, man, there was one picture, I was in preschool, maybe 3 years old, and it's a picture of her at the park with at least 15 kids. It was her own in-home daycare, and she ran it by herself. She was awesome. I remember also during the summers, she would buy a big jar of pickles, and she'd buy this huge thing of blow pops. And we would go to the local pools and we'd sell them. And so those are the things that I remember growing up. She would just hustle, Anytime there was a family emergency or anything like that, my parents, they would just automatically make barbecue tickets, and they'd make barbecue. Everyone would pitch in, they'd cook all day, they'd put them in plates, and then they'd sell them. And that was a barbecue benefit. We did that often. And that was just a way to make quick money, which, I never really knew that was instilled in me. I just knew that you can always get money somewhere. Just got to work for it, So I kind of grew up with that, but the business came about, much later in life for me, just within the recent few years. So that wasn't never the plan or in the dreams or I never was I want to run my own shop. So yeah, that came later.
If I walked into your store today, and it's called Made, correct?
Yes.
What would I expect to see?
You would expect to see colors. You would expect to hear fun music. You would expect to see me behind the bar, welcoming you in, smiling. It's very colorful in here and bright and happy. And we serve healthy things. We're a healthy cafe. And so my mindset is I just want people to leave better than I found them. So that's my goal. I want them to walk out with a smile, feeling great about the rest of their day. And a lot of people, they come and they'll say like, this is my happy space, or, this is my me time, or, I was feeling down and I just needed to go somewhere. And so, that makes me happy that's what I can provide, because I know in here, like ultimately at the end of the day, it's Jesus, what they feel, that to me is like ultimate blessing.
Speaking of Jesus, you have this opportunity where, you sell tea and you have a beautiful space and you love to make people feel welcome. Have you ever had an instance where you're able to share about Jesus or just love on somebody in a way that they just need that moment?
Almost every day. I feel that I was called into full-time ministry as a teenager. And I did. I went into full-time ministry whenever I was 19 years old. And that's where I met my husband. My husband's a pastor. I've never been able to work alongside him in a church. We've just never been at a church where that has been the norm. And so it's hard whenever you have the same desires and the same wants and the same talents and abilities, and you can't work alongside each other. And so God really, in the past few years, opened my eyes to, this is your ministry. This is the church outside of the church. The church is not just the building. Like, you can welcome people in, the unchurched in, and this is where they can meet me. And I loved that. And there's one story that I love to share, because we have a heart for kids, because my husband's a kids pastor. And it's the kid named TJ, preteen boy TJ, right? And he came in, he non-church, doesn't go to church anywhere. But, I just developed a relationship with him when he would come in on Saturdays. Hey, TJ, how's it going? And he would just come in every Saturday. And so, we just talk. I ask him about his day, how he's doing, how his week was, all the things. One Saturday, it was just, me and him in here, and our shop is big. We have big old windows and everything. But he was standing at my bar, and I was making his shake for him. And just out of the blue, we weren't even on this conversation, but he says, you know what I like most about this place? And I said, what? What do you like most? And I didn't know what to expect, right? He goes, I just love the way I feel when I'm in here. And I just about broke at that, because right where he was standing is our bar. And underneath all the beautiful tiles on our bar, underneath that, we had people come in before we open and write scripture and pray. And so he was literally standing where somebody had prayed. And he felt that. I know he could feel that. And just after building a relationship, we invited him and his family to church, and they ended up coming and they loved it. And they've been coming back. And that was just wow, God, you're so good and so big, and you are here, your presence is here. And I just, that's one of my favorite stories. But I've had opportunities to just, when people come in, just to pray with them, to share with them, to share our story about this space. And it's been a really awesome and beautiful blessing in my life to have this shop and to get to be here every day.
What a beautiful picture, because if you transition from your mom selling pickles and suckers at the pool to now you using those same gifts, yes, and it's in a different space, but now you're just able to exude love and a safe place for people like TJ who just need that safe spot just to be themselves. And then that opens up just a huge door for so much more. And what an impact you've made on just that one life. So that's amazing, Erika. I'm so glad for you. I do have some other questions, but I think it may connect into your story. So Erika, what would be one of your parable stories that you'd like to share with us today?
My parable story is a very long one. It's a culmination of things, but sometimes I believe that's how God works, it's a story of him showing his faithfulness time and time and time again. And then, like I said, this shop that I own is my graves into gardens moment. And what that means is God bringing death to life. And so that is a culmination of years and years and years of walking with the Lord. So it really starts before I met Jesus. And if I could give you a small, short picture of that, me as a kid, very bubbly, very energetic. I used to put on shows for my family. I loved Selena, so I would dress up like her and make my cousins all my backup dancers and make my family watch me perform. So from the outside looking in, people would say she's a happy-go-lucky girl, not a care in the world. What people did not realize was as a 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old little girl, I remember vividly having feelings of despair and loneliness and depression and even suicidal thoughts. As a kid, my heart had already been so broken and my little eyes had already seen so much brokenness in my family and generational traumas. And so it was a very dark place. And so I remember whenever I came to know who Jesus was, we went to a church for the first time and I was 10 years old. And when that pastor said, "Do you want to know Jesus?" I knew I needed Jesus. That was my own choice, my decision, my faith. I didn't even know that I could have a relationship with Jesus as a 10-year-old little girl. I didn't know. I just even remember thinking as he was talking and talking about Jesus and how he died on the cross, but he rose again and that you could have a relationship with him. I remember thinking, why hasn't anybody told me this? And so that's when I came to know Jesus, was at 10 years old. And me being the good student that I was, I delved into the Bible. Like I started in Genesis and was, reading through all the, whatnots of Leviticus and Deuteronomy. I didn't know what I was reading. But as a child, you read the book front to back. And so that's what I started to do, even though I didn't get hardly any of it. I wanted to know everything that I could. I wanted to be at every church service. I wanted to be in his presence. I wanted to be in God's presence. And I wanted to know his word. Because I realized, early on, okay, well, nobody ever told me. So what else don't I know?
Erika, once you met Jesus, what was life like after that?
So my life was still hard after Jesus. I, went through a really deep trauma of sexual molestation in the 6th grade. I was attacked by a group of boys, and that was devastating. And I still suffer from undiagnosed PTSD to this day, and just realizing the effects that it's had on me over the years, So things weren't easy after I met Jesus. But one of the first verses that I learned as a kid was actually in James chapter 1, verses 2 through 5, which is, I consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance, and perseverance must finish its work so that you can be complete and mature, not lacking anything. And I know that I memorized that verse as a kid. Now, looking back, right, after my years and years of walking with Jesus, I know that I memorized that verse because God knew that it was not going to be easy for me. That's life, right? Everyone has their things that they deal with day in and day out. If I can say this, most of us are probably dealing with something the majority of our lives. It's not all, rainbows and sunshine, although I want it to be the positive person that I am, but we go through struggles, but we can find joy in the midst. And that's what I've learned to do over the years. Go through all of those hurts and all the things that we went through. There were things even, stepping out big steps of faith and seeing God's faithfulness. When I got pregnant with my first child and we stepped out of ministry because we were in a very racially charged church and we didn't want to raise our child in that environment, especially as an interracial couple, me and my husband. And so stepping out of ministry, not knowing what was next, and we named our first daughter Faith Azariah, and Azariah means the Lord has provided. And so we knew he was going to provide. And then when we went into our next phase of ministry, we got pregnant with our second one. And our second child, her name is Hananiah Glory. And Hananiah means the Lord has protected or favored. And we felt that at that time. And then we didn't know if we were going to have more children at that point. But those names actually come from a story in the Bible. Most people know those names as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And actually their Hebrew names, their God-given names, were Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael. And so we already had our Hananiah and our Azariah. And we had a big gap. We had some hard struggles with our middle child and some very hard ministry transitions at that point in time as well. And a lot of church hurt. And me and my husband, for the majority of our marriage, have not lived near family. We've been in ministry our entire marriage. And so, whenever God says go, we go. And so whenever we got pregnant with our third child 4 years ago in January 2018, December of 2017, we actually announced on Christmas Day that we were pregnant. And since we don't live near family, social media was how we did it. Of course, we called parents first and everything, but it was this big, amazing thing. and we announced that we were pregnant, and we were so excited for what was next. And then that was short-lived because in January of 2018, we found out that we had miscarried.
Erika, I am truly sorry for what you had to go through. What do you remember going through your head during that moment?
That was really difficult because I love being a mom. And, whenever you get pregnant, you immediately love this baby that you've never even met. And you immediately start thinking about what they're going to look like and who they're going to be and how God is going to use them. And whenever you miscarry, it's like all those dreams just feel shattered. And for me, I blamed myself. And that was really hard. But we knew that at that point, because we had shared publicly, we wanted to mourn publicly. My mom had a miscarriage when I was in high school, but she never really talked about it. I just remember seeing her ultrasound picture on the mirror in her room, and it would just sit in a corner. But I don't ever remember processing grief with her. I don't remember anything spoken about that child. So we wanted to share, and we wanted to open up the conversation when it came to miscarriage. And so we did, and we shared publicly, and we mourned publicly, and we actually named our baby Mishael, which means who is like God. We didn't know at the time what the purpose of all of it was, because whenever we're grieving, we want to say why. And so at the time we didn't really know, but that baby, Mishael, was a catalyst for something that God was doing in us. That baby literally changed the whole entire trajectory of our lives. So just going into a really sweet time of comfort with the Lord and him just really doing some healing. Ended up, me and my husband started a health journey together because of this. We felt like we were just sick and tired at that point. And so we went on a health journey together. That's what spurred this whole thing. And so we wanted to run a marathon in honor of the baby that we lost. And so on this health journey over the months leading up to the marathon, we ended up losing 70 pounds together. And we trained for this marathon in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And we're in Gilbert, Arizona. There are no mountains here, really. And the marathon was in September, okay? So that means you're in the hottest time of the year in Gilbert, Arizona, and we're trying to train for a marathon, okay? So there's this one gym called Freestone, and they have a running track above their gym, and it's something like 18 laps is a mile. Girl, we ran so many laps. What a perfect picture, though, of like our lives as humans. Like sometimes we just run in circles and we're just repeating the same thing. But God doesn't call us to do that, man. He called us to conquer that mountain. So we trained as much as we could here in Gilbert, Arizona, and the marathon just so happened to be in the place where we had experienced the most church hurt, but it was the closest one and the one near the date that we could do it, which just so happened to be the due date weekend of when our baby would have been due. And so it was a very emotional roller coaster at that point. But the marathon was probably the best thing for our walk because it was a true representation of what we were going through on the inside. There are times whenever you're running a marathon and you feel awesome and there is beauty around you and you feel great. And then there are other times where it takes every ounce within you to just put one foot in front of the other. There were times where me and my husband were just crying. There were times where we were just walking. There were times where we were running. There were times where we were mourning. And it was just such a beautiful representation of my walk with Jesus, that although it was hard in every way, that it was so worth it. And I remember we were probably one of the last people to cross the finish line. But as soon as I crossed the finish line, I just broke and I just cried. And I was so thankful. It's so hard to hold space for grief and joy at the same time. It feels weird, but I think that's exactly what that verse in James was talking about. Consider it pure joy whenever you face trials of many kinds. That was exactly what I felt in that moment, that God had really brought us through something, but it hurt like hell. So that was a beautiful thing. So again, like I said, that would have been our due date weekend. My husband carried the little shirt that I had made to announce our pregnancy that said Team Harris, and it said, that's our last name, Harris. And, it had baby number 3. And he carried that with him the entire run. And it turns out that we ended up getting pregnant with our rainbow baby that same weekend. And I don't know if that's TMI, but that is, I was literally pregnant when I was running that marathon, and I did not know what God was doing inside of me, literally, at that moment. I did not know what he was restoring in me. I did not know that he was putting that graves into gardens moment, bringing that death to life. I had no idea. And so, so whenever that came to fruition, of course, and we actually knew we were pregnant and found, like, it was just such a beautiful thing. But then that led us to, that was a really long story to get to this point, but that led us to wanting to help people get healthy, one shaken tea at a time. Literally, that's all we wanted to do, was just help people make healthier choices. That is how we got to this point with our shop. And so with our shop, we knew that we wanted a name that meant something. So one, we wanted every person to know that they are fearfully and wonderfully made, that they were made with a purpose, that they were made with a reason, that the world needs who they were made to be. And so that's why the name Made. And then we wanted to share our story in this space. So part of our logo is the state of Arizona. It says Made, and then we have a butterfly, a little geometric butterfly. And the butterfly is actually the universal symbol for infancy and pregnancy loss. And so, but I had always had a thing for butterflies beforehand. The whole idea of transformation. I even wrote a 92-day devotional, Made New in 92, and that was years before I even went through all of this. And the picture that I put on this devotional was a butterfly, a beautiful blue butterfly. And when we think about it, what the butterfly goes through is not beautiful at all. They're in a cocoon and they are broken and they're mush and, they're unrecognizable. And it's not a pretty thing to go through, but at the end of it, it is something beautiful. So I just think that's a perfect description of our shop, is that butterfly. And then our butterfly, which we just wanted to put all the rainbow colors on it, because we believe that our rainbow baby is a baby that is born after a miscarriage. And of course, we knew that God's faithfulness was there all along, right? And his symbol of faithfulness is the rainbow. And so that is the story in our shop, and that is the story we get to tell every time a person walks in. Every time we get the opportunity, that is what we get to share, is the story of God's faithfulness. And that's just the culmination of it. But man, have I seen him be faithful since I was a 10-year-old little girl? Absolutely. It has been moment after moment after moment.
Erika, I would have to say that just by hearing your story, obviously witnessing God's faithfulness through this, but such bravery, the bravery to continue on from what you experienced as a child, just being a mom and suffering through loss. Eric and I, we lost a baby between our two kids. And I have to say, I experienced some of those same emotions that you had, where it's just I felt like it was my fault. I don't know why, we feel that way about ourselves sometimes. And I totally agree with you as well. That idea, miscarriage sometimes isn't talked about. I think in past generations, I just don't know if it was because they didn't have social media or it was just something that just was not spoken of. But that's so brave of you that both you and your husband chose to mourn that publicly, because then I think it opens the opportunity for people to also mourn, to grieve, because there's so many times in our life that we shove those things down. So my question to you is, when you're talking about graves in the garden, how do you help, or how would you encourage people to be able to mourn? Because there's been a lot of stuff that's gone on in our lives, in our communities, in the world. How do we learn how to mourn?
I don't like to sit in my grief. I don't like it at all. I love to feel happy, but that's maybe because it's for so long, I knew what it was like, and I don't ever want to go back. And so I have to really be intentional about allowing myself to grieve. A lot of times I can feel like when I want to grieve, it stops right in the throat. It wells up from my gut and it just stops right at the throat. And I try to swallow it down. I try to just hold it there and I don't want to just release it. But what I have found over the years is that it is better to release it. It is better to just allow yourself to sit in that grief because you need to allow yourself to be comforted. That was some of the most precious times with my husband, with God, with other people, realizing that I wasn't alone, realizing that other people needed me to share my story so that they could share their story as well. And so when people don't know, they don't know what they don't know. So if people don't know you're grieving, how can you be comforted? How can you experience God's comfort and his love and his peace from outside? Because he, of course, can do that supernaturally. But we need people. That's how he created us. So when people don't know, they don't know how to help us. Whenever I was a kid, nobody would have known what I was going through. Nobody did know because I didn't say anything. So there was no way that I could receive. And so, that's my encouragement is allow yourself to sit in the grief. It's okay to grieve loss. Jesus grieved, Jesus wept. And so I think sometimes it's just hard because we don't want to feel it, but it's there. It's still there. So you might as well express it.
Erika, you said when you were a little girl, before you ever met Jesus, that you had those feelings of despair and loneliness and just being depressed. And, from the outside, you said you were bubbly and happy. And would you say that even after you knew Jesus, you found that hope, that you still struggled and still had to kind of put your foot into two worlds because you're trying to figure out what this hope is like, but you're still struggling with the things that are a part of your life. Is that true?
Absolutely. Because whenever you learn something, it's hard to relearn. Whenever you learn something a certain way, so I was a dancer. And so whenever I learned choreography the wrong way, it was really hard for me to get the choreography the right way because it's muscle memory. And so it's kind of the same thing with your emotions. If you're not working that muscle in a different way, it's still going to continue to do what it does. So even after I experienced my trauma as a 6th grade girl, I never told anybody. I shoved it down and I didn't tell a single soul till I was in my early 20s. So yeah, it was really difficult to share and to open up. And I didn't even learn how to do that until probably my early 20s and started to realize it was okay to be vulnerable. And it was hard to be vulnerable. There were some other things that I went through in junior high and high school and, with bullies and girls. And so you start to build up these walls, of protection. But as I got into adulthood and really, my relationship with Jesus, was becoming more mature. As I was becoming more mature, I was able to realize that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to share. It's okay to be able to process those things with other people and to begin to learn to trust people. I'm still learning that. As an adult, and that's okay, But the thing is everyone is imperfect. At some point, people are going to fail you. And we just have to realize that we're all imperfect people. So yeah, you just have to be able to be vulnerable and open up and know that it's okay to share and to be you.
Erika, you are a mom of 3 girls. With that experience from your childhood, has that played a part as how you parent, how you kind of have that mama bear approach to what your kids are doing at school, extracurricular activities, who are they going with? Has that kind of that mindset popped out, and how has that really been displayed for you?
Absolutely. With my girls, I am more intentional because I know what I did not share with my mom. My mom had trauma, right? She had trauma that she dealt with, and she dealt with some really horrible things, but she did the best that she could with the tools that she had. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the best that I can with the tools that I have for my children. So I've been able to educate myself and to be intentional with my children when it comes to communicating. me and my husband are very intentional about communication with them and sharing with them too, because even the trauma that I went through in the 6th grade, part of the reason I didn't share was because I felt like it was my fault, right? As a little girl, like I thought it was my fault. I thought that they would blame me, that I would get in trouble, which is part of the reason I didn't share. The shame and the guilt, and then it was my fault. So I never want my girls to feel that way. I want them to know no matter what you do, what happens to you, no matter what, you can always talk to me and I won't freak out. I may be freaking out on the inside, but I always want to remain with that demeanor that they can come to me. And then also to have conversations with them early on and be able to, at age appropriate conversations, and begin to share my story with them at age appropriate times. My oldest, she is in 7th grade. And so she knows my story because I felt she needed to know, because if that happened to me in the 6th grade, you never know. Right? And so I want them to be aware, and I want them to be able to know that they can speak up, that they can speak up for themselves, that they can speak up for others. They can say, hey, this is not right. That they can speak up if there is anything that anybody says or does that makes them feel the least bit uncomfortable, that it's okay. And no matter who it is, if it's a kid, if it's an adult, you have the right to your own feelings and you can communicate that. And we can always talk through that. So yeah, definitely for sure. There's lots of prayer. There's lots of, crazy things that I have to deal with as mama bear in my own head and have to trust and release and be like, God, you love my children more than I do, because I do also want them to experience life and experience friendships and all those things. But we live in a crazy world and sometimes a sick world. And I want to make sure that their relationship with Jesus can help them through that. And so they've been able to even see us in our faith journey and see God's faithfulness in everything, so that no matter what they face, no matter what comes their way, that they know that God is there in the midst and that he can take any bad situation in their life, but use it for good. That's a word that I would say is very intentional with them, with the things that I have been through and wanting them to have better.
That is super important. I think that's important for any relationship, that intentionality. You think about our relationship with Jesus, our family, our friends. I mean, it just helps so much. I was going through all these different questions that you could just ask friends. And one really stood out to me because I kind of have the same mindset. It was, what's a lie that you have to fight hard not to believe? And when you were talking about, yourself as a child and just growing up, even like what you had thought about the miscarriage of that, that it was your fault. Is there this lie or this thing that you just kind of have to fight back every day because we want to live this life joyfully in this contrast because of graves and gardens? Is there something that you feel like this one's a hard one to handle?
I can't even say it. That I'm not good enough. And I don't know if that stems from the trauma, from other situations in my life, the bullying, but that is the constant voice that I have to fight, even in adulthood, even now. Even with this very podcast, I'll be honest, I delayed a lot. And I would see it, and it would, your invitation, and you would, the dates, and I'd be like, like I just didn't feel good enough, even with my shop, and knowing that I love this space and I love what I do, I struggle with, am I good enough? Am I enough? I don't know if I am. And I have to constantly remind myself of what I tell people that walk into this space every single day.
We are soul sisters, Erika. That is exactly mine.
Yeah. And I believe that's kind of what James was saying, in that verse, is that consider it pure joy whenever you face trials of many kinds. The testing of your faith develops perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work so that you can be complete and mature, not lacking anything. This is the thing. We're not supposed to be complete and mature, not lacking anything on this side of heaven, And so if I'm 88 years old and I'm like, I am complete immature, not lacking in anything, I'm pretty sure I'm lying. Like this life is ongoing. And the only person that attained that perfection, was Jesus. Jesus was perfection. So I think that, some of those things that we will struggle with and deal with until we reach the other side of heaven. And then we can stand before Jesus and he can tell us, you are good enough. You are loved, and that's whenever we'll really realize the truth at that point, I feel like, and really take it in.
It's so funny that you have that opportunity to share that with others, and that would just be completely natural to tell people that they are loved, they are worthy, they're kind. I do the same thing, except, I was telling my parents the other day, and I know my parents love me. I know my God loves me. I know my husband loves me, but there's that voice that's inside. And I think it's always going to be there for me. It's the one thing that I'm going to have to fight. I do believe it is of the devil, but it is just something where I constantly struggle with that thought, and I'd love to figure out why. But I appreciate you sharing that, because literally I feel the same thing. I feel that so often, all the time.
Yeah. And I believe that's kind of what James was saying, in that verse, is that consider it pure joy whenever you face trials of many kinds. The testing of your faith develops perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work so that you can be complete and mature, not lacking anything. This is the thing. We're not supposed to be complete and mature, not lacking anything on this side of heaven, And so if I'm 88 years old and I'm like, I am complete immature, not lacking in anything, I'm pretty sure I'm lying. Like this life is ongoing. And the only person that attained that perfection, was Jesus. Jesus was perfection. So I think that, some of those things that we will struggle with and deal with until we reach the other side of heaven. And then we can stand before Jesus and he can tell us, you are good enough. You are loved, and that's whenever we'll really realize the truth at that point, I feel like, and really take it in.
Yeah. Oh, it will feel good to take it in. Exactly. Erika, thank you so much for just choosing to be vulnerable, sharing what was on your heart, and accepting this invitation to come and talk to us on the Parable Podcast, because really your voice matters. It has worth, it has value, and you're doing amazing work, with the lives of your girls, but also the people of your town and your community. So thank you so much. Is there anything else that we missed that you wanted to share today?
Man, I don't think so. I think I touched on everything that I wanted to, because it's a story of God's faithfulness. Oh, I didn't say this, is that I relate it to the story of Joseph. He went through years and years and years of trial after trial after trial before he got to the point of where he was, second in command of all of Egypt. And so, so that's kind of, I think, how our life is. It's this journey, and we're going to face thing after thing after thing, but God has a plan at the end of it all, and he works it all together for our good.
Thankfully, he's always got it together, because I don't know.
Yes.
That's amazing.
Absolutely.
Erika, if people wanted to get connected to you, tell us about your shop and where they can find you on Instagram.
Instagram is pretty much where I live. Don't let the reels scare you away, all right? But my shop's Instagram is @made_Gilbert, MADE. And that's where you can find, all about the business and the shakes and the teas and all the yummy goodness. And then my personal Instagram, feel free to follow me on there as well. I don't mind having friends, and I share a lot on there just about, we do funny videos, me and my family, and you'll see more crazy reels. But I share about my marriage and my children and church and, all the things. So, and that is Erika Harris, ErikaHarris. That's where you can find me.
Erika, thank you so much. I truly appreciate you just stepping out and just being on the Parable Podcast today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I love that Erika was so willing to say that she was hesitant to share. We all get in that mindset in our own life where we feel hesitant because one, is it a safe place to share, or we think that it doesn't even matter. And it does. Our stories do matter. So we need to be aware of those lies, those false conversations, and maybe start a conversation with a friend. Have a safe space to do that. Maybe you need to journal about it or bring it to God. There's always going to be fruit when we work through it and we share our stories. Be sure to connect with Erika if her story impacted you today, or if you are in the Gilbert, Arizona area, or maybe you are vacationing through that area. Stop by, grab a drink, say hi to Erika at Made. All of her info will be linked in the show notes at daniellezapchenk.com. So grab a journal and utilize these reflection questions so that you can have some more time to understand what God's trying to teach you this week. Number 1, what's a lie that you have been fighting so hard not to believe? Number 2, have you been running in circles like Erika and her husband were at that gym, just running circles around a certain situation or instance, or maybe it's even a memory? You keep coming back to it. Bring that over to God this week and ask Him, what is He trying to teach you? What are you trying to learn from it? Maybe you're trying to grow from that situation. Thank you so much for listening. Come follow me on Instagram or Facebook. I'm at Danielle Zapchenk. That's Zapchenk. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen, whether on Apple, Spotify, or even on YouTube, and leave a rating or review. That really helps people find out about the podcast. And thank you so much to my amazing husband for editing this podcast today.
Wow, that's amazing.
That'll do it for today. Thank you so much for spending time with me. Remember, your parable showcases your own graves to garden moment. We'll see you back again next week on the Parable Podcast.